The idea for this topic today came together, again, in a partnership between our two groups. And what's interesting, a lot of the companies that I'm working with, a little bit on the smaller side, some of the businesses that you folks from the PDA are involved a little bit on the larger side. Nonetheless, it's a common thread between all the companies, whether they are small or large, and that leads us to our panel today. So I have three panelists. I will go to my immediate left. Sal Mondelli is a corporate and ESOP board member, executive coach, consultant for the Bailey Group. Sal and I have known each other probably for 20, 25 years. We interacted a number of times in the business community. Thanks for coming, Sal. I have Cora Liebig in the middle, founder and CEO of Chromatic 3D Materials. Thanks for being here. Cora's spoken a couple of times in the past. She's one of my portfolio companies and has done a wonderful job building her business, which she'll tell you about, and navigating having a board and having both the good parts of a board and maybe some of the things that are growing and growth opportunities for managing a board. And last but not least, Libby Utter. Libby is a search and business development consultant at Lyman Executive Search. So why don't I give you all an opportunity to tell me a little bit more about your background. You got the mics there on the table. Sal, let's start with you. Tell everybody a little bit more about you.
Sure. Thanks, Rick. I was just sitting here saying, when we met each other 25 years ago, I had more hair and you had less.
That's actually very true. That is true.
True fact.
That is true.
So I spent most of my working career in technology, worked for IBM for 15 years, ran small and growing hardware, software services company for another 15 years. And I've been on boards, mostly not-for-profit, and then in the last 4 or 5 years, I've been in some for-profit boards. And it's all been a great experience. I am on the executive committee with Libby for the local PDA chapter. That's been another terrific experience. And I co-chair the membership committee with a guy that some of you probably know called Lenny Newman.
All right, Cora, how about you?
Good afternoon, everyone. Always a pleasure to come back here. Always great to meet everybody here. So my experience with boards, I spent about 12 years at Dow Chemical, really didn't involve anything to do with the board there, but then I moved up to Minneapolis about 15 years ago and was COO of a for-profit company that had a board, and we actually had to go through a CEO transition there, and that was quite, I learned a lot about boards in working through that, and then also the eventual unwinding of a business. So the board is very instrumental through all of that. So I was more of an executive, not on the board in that situation, but more, in 2/3 of the meetings. And then I started my own business about 8 years ago, Chromatic 3D Materials. We've attracted about $15 million in investment. And getting into some of the questions we'll be talking about later, really when you're bringing in other people's money, that really means that you're probably going to bring in a board. And so we have it's a for-profit board, a little bit different than a non-profit board, but and we've had to develop the board quite a bit, and you get a lot of requests from investors to join the board, and so I hope to touch on that.
And growing the board and shrinking the board.
Exactly. We just went through a transition where we had a number of board observers, and we ended up shrinking it to say, no, we're going to create an advisory board for all of you board observers and keep the board meetings to just be board members. And so I can talk a little bit about how that can happen and when to change it.
And I would also say, she was talking about raising the money. One of the marks I give Cora credit for, and we've talked about that, is she's been very efficient with the money that she's raised, and I've had an inside seat for about 4.5 years, so glad to have you here. Thank you. Libby, tell us a little bit more about you.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. Libby Utter. Nice to meet those of you I don't already know. I am, as Rick mentioned, a search and business development consultant for Lyman Executive Search, and we do C-level and board search predominantly for privately held middle market companies, although we have ventured into the public company board space. So that's really part of the reason that I'm here. I also bring executive experience leading nonprofits and reporting to boards, and have chaired boards and done board service for many, many years. So I'm here to share a little bit of a different point of view than Sal and Cora. Happy to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for being here. Greatly appreciate it. I've also had the opportunity to know and interact with Libby for a number of years. So again, thank you for being here. All right, in no particular order, although maybe Sal, you're closest to me, so I'm going to pick on you first, and we can just work our way that way. Let's start with kind of the base level, which is why would you or why would somebody out here want and or need a board?
I think it really depends on what it is you want to accomplish with your particular company and where are you in the growth cycle. So if you're a company that wants to have a lifestyle business, you may or may not need a board. But if you're in a growth business or you're in an area where you say, I want to go from 5 to 10 to 20 to 50 million, it usually is better to have somebody who's already done that before to help advise you. And we'll talk about the different versions of that. I think a board can help you validate the strategy. I think the board can also ask inquisitive questions to help you decide what you don't want to do. We've all, and there may be some in the room, I'm not going to, maybe people who like to chase the silver, the purple squirrel or the shiny object. And the board can kind of help you say why you want to do that. If you have a strategy, you can always come back and say, how does that affect the strategy? How does that move the needle? Ask the questions that really maybe an entrepreneur or somebody who's not done it before have not asked. And I think the bigger thing is help avoid the speed bumps and the potholes, because there's speed bumps and potholes in every business. Some of it depends on timing. Some of it depends on lack of execution.
Cora?
So I know we're going to be talking a little bit about the distinction between an advisory board and a fiduciary board. But I think just to start off, I think any executive team should want to have advice from the outside. That's just healthy. So in the benefit of an advisory board, and I think that's where I want to draw a little bit of a distinction, an advisory board is one where you can kind of assemble people with various backgrounds and really have a very thorough, strong discussion about what you want to achieve and how you want to grow the business, how do you want to develop the business and get their ideas. A fiduciary board is one where it's really in service of the shareholders. They have to act in the best interest of the company, but they're really in service of the shareholders. And so why should you want a fiduciary board? You should want a fiduciary board if you want to be able to attract the dollars of shareholders. So if you think about it, if you have an operating business and you're going to give up maybe 10% of the ownership of the company, why would someone who's only owning 10% of the company just hand you money without any discretion or any ability to look after what's happening with their money? Of course, it's a more attractive investment if you can offer them a fiduciary board that's either been already acting and already serving, or one where they can be a part of it.
Great. Libby.
Coming third, I won't repeat anything that anybody else said, but I think of why would you want or need a board? If you all harken back to who is the best teacher or professor you've ever had, and how did they enlighten you and ask the right questions to get you to best understand, I was an English major, The Great Gatsby, Paradise Lost, right? I could have read that and just gone, yeah, that's cool, whatever, good book. Instead, you have someone who asks you questions to get you to think differently. That's why you want a board. You may be the most creative person in the world, but we all have our loops, and a board helps you get out of your own loop.
Libby, let's stay down with you. When should somebody establish a board, and how large should they be, whether you're looking at revenue or other metrics? And how would you advise somebody trying to make that decision?
Sure. The answer is it varies, which is a terrible answer, but I think if you are someone who is really a lone wolf, and we all know who we are. You should establish a board maybe sooner because you don't want to get trapped in that loop. And it can be, as Cora said, advisory to start. Boards have life cycles, and it's okay to start with a kitchen cabinet, move to an advisory board, move to a fiduciary board. It's okay to do that. There are pitfalls along the way we can talk about later. When you are small, when you are sub, let's say 5 million, your board does not have to be large, and it should not be large. It should be some trusted advisors and who have the ability to convene with you as you need them. The larger the board, the harder it is to get people together to convene. And at some point, because we're talking about corporate boards, you have to figure out you're paying these people in one form or another. And so your board meetings need to be substantive, and that means that you have to offer something to your board. Just to your point too, they're going to offer you things. You're offering them something too, and so it's important to be thoughtful about that. So ideal size of a board: small and scale up when you grow your revenues. Perhaps life cycle from kitchen cabinet to fiduciary also goes with size or complexity of the business that you're in. And I would say never get too big. If you don't hear somebody talk at your board meeting, your board is too big, or you have the wrong board member.
Cora, when did you set up your board for Chromatic 3D, and how would you maybe put that across what other people here might do when they're thinking about when they should start a board?
So I started my board when we basically issued Series A investment. So that usually goes with Series A. So that usually comes around a $5 million investment, or could be $2 or $3 million. But as soon as you're bringing in other people's money, that's really in a substantial amount. So if you think about an early, not to get too VC land on this, but if you're bringing in seed rounds with a SAFE or something like that, one of the risks of a SAFE is that you don't have some of that some of the shareholder oversight. What happens when you really issue equity is that usually there's they set up corporate governance, and those are usually the terms associated with getting your Series A term sheet. Is here's how the board is going to govern. Here's the kinds of limitations that the executive team might have. And I think that, so getting back to when to set up a board, not only does a board, might a board cost money. I happen to have an unpaid board member, so there's just the cost of the meeting. But actually setting up that governance can run you a legal bill that's somewhere between $10,000 and $50,000. So it has to be worth that. So we set up a board really because it was required by the investors we wanted to bring in. We knew that that was going to be one of the requirements. I think the other thing to recognize when you're setting up a fiduciary board is that you're really giving up, you're handing over some of the controls of the business to this board. And it might be that there's some thresholds of how much money you can spend without their approval. So it usually comes in the form of thresholds. And so, and I've had an interesting discussion with one of our customers, owns his own business. He's sort of a 51% owner, and he's German, so it comes from a very different environment, corporate environment. And it just boggles his mind that in the US you would give up controls in order to bring in investments. So you can be in a situation where you're giving up 25% of the ownership of your business, but actually you're giving the board a lot more controls so that they can have oversight over the use of their money. And it's really good for fraud prevention, et cetera. So when did I set up? I set up, really with Series A. It was a requirement really for bringing in the investment. And there's a cost associated with bringing in that kind of governance.
Did you have an advisory board before the fiduciary board?
Yes.
Okay. And did you start that close to forming the company, or?
I started the advisory board really within the first year.
Okay.
Really to get advice on where to bring in people, markets to pursue, and even technology approaches.
Great.
So.
Sal, how about you? When should somebody get their board up and running, and what should their business look like?
I think it's a great question. I'm not sure that it has to do with revenue size. I think it has to do with where you're at in the life cycle and what you need, especially if you're a first-time CEO, first-time business owner. There's an investor in the room who will remain nameless who asked me to meet with a first-time CEO, and he buys me coffee. And the first meeting we had was, I got to fire 2 software engineers. I don't know how to do it. Great. We had an hour conversation, and the next time, my first question was, did they sue you? And the answer was no. So I guess it worked out. It worked out okay. And I've been on 3 ESOP boards. The first one, which are all fiduciary by requirement. The first one we converted to an ESOP, so the CEO was really on board with doing it. We'd been an advisory board for about 5 years. He treated us like a fiduciary board. It was about a $120 million company in a very tough industry. So he was fine. Then I was on another $120 million company, about a 20-year ESOP. Then I would generously say the CEO tolerated the board. That's a generous way of describing it. And then I'm on another one, which started, the guy who owned the company for 35 years, highly profitable. I mean, doesn't have any formal education, just ran it terrifically. And he just didn't see the value. It took about a year for him to see the value. And his answer was, you can help me take this company places I can't take myself. I think if that's one thing you remember, that's what you can do as a board member. And the other thing, it's not about the money, right? Unless you're on a public company board, you're not making $1 gajillion. Some of us get equity, some of us get a moderate retainer. Nobody wants to get taken advantage of. So I think from that standpoint, it's all about where people want to go.
Okay, great. Thank you.
I just want to add another case for having a board. I'm in a CEO cohort, and a number of them are kind of founders and owners. And many are thinking about, how do I transition out of being so involved in the day-to-day of the business operations? And actually, one way you can do that is by having a board that kind of, where you become a member of the board, you're obviously a shareholder, but you're trying to separate that, the fiduciary responsibility to shareholders from the day-to-day operations. And so that's one way that you can transition if you don't want to necessarily give up ownership, but you want to allow someone else to operate, is to set up a board for doing
Good
something
point.
like that.
Libby, Cora introduced a few of the ideas of the difference between a informal advisory board and a fiduciary, a more formal board. Maybe talk a little bit from your perspective about those differences.
Sure. Sometimes, I mean, there are absolute differences. So a fiduciary board, as Cora said, you have your ultimate responsibility to the shareholders or the owner of the organization, to the entity that owns the organization. The fiduciary board has really 3 main duties. It's the duty of loyalty, it's the duty of obedience, it's the duty of care. And really, legally, you are responsible. And so anybody who's going onto a board needs to take all of that very seriously. You are not beholden to the CEO. You are not beholden to the management team or your cousin or whoever it is. You are legally beholden to the owners of the entity. So think carefully about that. And ask the question, is your board fiduciary or advisory? Many advisory boards are treated like fiduciary boards. And so you can't necessarily tell the difference all the time. Unless you're really looking and poking at it. And it's not as if you have to do that, but you need to know as a prospective board member, what is this board? Because you're on the hook. Does that answer your question?
Yep. Sal, how about you? How would you characterize the differences between the more informal advisory board and the formal fiduciary board?
Yeah, I think Cora and Libby hit a lot of the hot topics. One major one in my mind is Fiduciary board, the board can fire the CEO, plus the legal requirements. I'll bet you there's half the people on boards, fiduciary boards, couldn't tell you what the duty of care and the duty of loyalty mean, because they're the legal requirements that you have as a board member. And on the advisory board side, the opposite of that is the CEO can fire the board. Right? And I've seen that happen, and it's not very pretty sometimes. So you got to be careful on the advisory board. If the CEO or the owner is not taking your advice, then stop wasting his or her money and your time to go into that. I think that's the big thing that I would add to that.
Okay. Cora, how about you as far as the skill set you mentioned you built an advisory board, then you raised, you got your Series A, did the more fiduciary formal board. What skills were you looking for, and what skills do you think a board member should have?
And this is something that I've had to develop over time, because obviously, and what I think has been challenging is that the larger your cap table gets, so I think right now my investor list is probably about 30 or 40 investors. Everyone who, you should always take it very seriously when you're handling someone else's money, right? I take that personally very responsible, no matter how big the check. If it's a $10,000 investment or $1 million investment, it's significant to that person for sure. So at first, I would say that the criteria for getting a board seat was pretty much how big a check did you put in. But what's had to happen over time is, first of all, looking at how much do they want to continue to invest in the business. So because a lot of investors, some are right and some are wrong. A lot of investors think that, because they can contribute money to your cause, that they also have a pretty important opinion about how your business should be run. And maybe they're right and maybe they're wrong. So coming back to what are some of the skill sets, I think it's very good to make sure that everyone has complementary skill sets on the board. So right now, my board, we have someone who's very technologically oriented. He's sort of a CTO type. So and he also has a very long point of view of a long time horizon in terms of how he thinks about investment. I have another one who's much more commercially oriented, wants to make sure we're building the partnerships where we need to have them. And then another one who's been, I would say, a dark horse as a board member. He's personally very wealthy, doesn't invest on behalf of a VC, but he's mostly invested in banks, and he serves on a lot of boards of banks. And so he's invested in Chromatic because it's interesting to him, but he brings to the table a lot of financial perspectives of what's happening in the market. For example, when we renewed our lease a few years ago, he's like, get as long a term as you can. So, and he was the only one with that opinion. But it's nice to have someone who's not necessarily in the domain expertise, because they can usually offer a perspective of how to run the business that maybe you wouldn't have otherwise. So I think having some level of domain expertise on the board is important. You want to make sure that the board is very aware of the challenges your business is facing and what's hard about it. So they appreciate when you're doing amazing things, but also can challenge you when you're not going about it in the right way.
Okay. Libby, as a recruiter, when you're trying to assess board members, what skills do you think they should have?
Every single search is different, and every board has different needs. So, if you're looking at a traditional board or a public company board, there are some must-haves. You have to have a qualified financial expert. You typically need a lawyer. And then from there, you fill in with skills, domain expertise, et cetera. And then there are trends. Quite frankly, there are board trends. And I will say 2 years ago, every single board search we did, the the predominant qualification was a DEI-related qualification. I think anybody who follows the news sees that that is no longer as top of mind right now. That's just a statement. But so there are always trends in what people are looking for. Our job is to go in and really look at the board and help assess the board. Typically, our board searches do that up front. We meet all the board members, get to know them, and matrix them out on what skills they bring. And it's not functional skills always. It's functional skills, it's diversity of thought, diversity of industry, diversity of geography, ability to have grown to a point that this company is trying to grow. Analogous industries. I mean, there are just a million different ways to kind of think about it. And as Cora said, really finding complementary skills. Boards have to have a culture that can work together. It doesn't mean you can't challenge each other, and in fact, you must challenge each other. But if it's just one big fight, it's an ineffective board. So complement each other, challenge each other, bring a diversity of point of view and knowledge.
Sal, how about you?
Yeah, first I want to go back and reinforce something that Cora said about don't give somebody a vote that shouldn't have a vote. Because if you let them do it once, they're going to want to do it 2 through N, and you shouldn't let them do it the first time. But I agree with Libby. There's 2 buckets of skills. There's the functional skill, and I think any board you want somebody who's sat in the seat before. So you want a current or former CEO. You want a current or former CFO to help you with the finances. And then the rest of them depends on how many you want to have. I've been on boards that have the company corporate counsel, outside counsel, as the corporate secretary. That's a great skill. CHRO to talk about compensation and trends in that direction. And then there's always the rub about industry skills, which may or may not be a big deal, right? I mean, medtechs, if you don't have medtech on your forehead, right, we don't even talk to you. I totally get that. But I've been on a construction company board, 2 engineering company boards, a transportation company, and a software company. I know something about software. I have anything to do with any of the other ones. I also say, how about retail? A retail person understands the customer, the end user of a lot of products, and they can ask questions and turn that issue around and look at it with a different lens that, I don't care if you're med tech, manufacturing, software, whatever, can ask some interesting questions, which goes to the other side, which is be inquisitive, be curious, be willing to invest time in what you're doing in the company. Don't just show up, get a check, and go away. And the other, Libby kind of took, be able to play well with others, and not always want to be the smartest person in the room. There's a lot of people that like to be the smartest person in the room, which usually means they're not.
Can I add one quick thing
Of course.
to that? I think we all know here that there's a difference between advising and operating, and board members also need to know that. So when you are forming or launching a board, make sure that you're not bringing the best supply chain expert in the world onto your board who wants to do the job, because that will be an ineffective board member. Just as an example.
Yeah, so Libby, let's stay down there, and that's the next question I'm going to ask here. There's certainly there are skills you want a board member to have, but then the question here is what criteria? So kind of the nose in but hands out kind of thing. But talk a little bit about the criteria for what you think a good board member is.
Sure. Again, asking the right questions. It's about asking questions. It's about thinking. It's about providing scenarios that they've seen and experienced that might help you think through things and think differently. Playing well with others, absolutely. If you have a boardroom filled with the smartest person in the room, you're going to get nothing done. But you also don't want a boardroom of yes people or people who just bow to either to the chair of the board, who is not always the CEO, of course, or bow to the CEO. And then I would say the other criteria is you know, we all have different personalities, and some people take information in and need to process it. And I think the board needs to understand who's around the table so that you don't automatically say, well, Joe here hasn't said anything, so he must not be engaged. Perhaps he's not, and if he's not, that's something that has to be dealt with. Perhaps he processes differently. You got to determine that, and that's part of really the recruitment process and getting to know people. I think people forget that there should be a process to bringing someone on a board that's more than just, you're smart, your resume is good, and I kind of like you. So dig a little bit deeper.
Okay. Cora.
One skill set I just want to add to the table, we haven't said it explicitly, is self-awareness. I think self-awareness is an absolute criteria. It goes with what Libby was saying, but it's like you really have to have an awareness in the boardroom of when your ideas will contribute and be constructive, and when you need to defer to someone else's expertise, or when you think another voice needs to be in the room. Like you really have to have a good self-awareness, because you are helping a company really. You're probably only engaged 2% of the time that company is operating. And so you need to be able to very quickly be able to assess a situation with limited information, and you need to be able to recognize when there's more things that you need to be diving into, or when you need to sit down and shut up. That's
all right. Sal?
I think it's important, as Libby and Cora said, to know you're still an advisory role, even if you're a fiduciary, right? So at the end of the day, it's not your call unless you see something going the wrong way. So the old deal of here's how I would do it doesn't necessarily work. I get that in coaching a lot. Well, what would you do? Well, here's what I'm hearing you say. Tell me more about your issue. What are the pros and cons? You can keep asking those questions, and usually the CEO will come up with here's what we have to do. I ask, like coaching CEO clients and the board, I ask them two questions. Could you fire your best friend if you had to? Because if you start out with a company and you got 6 people and they're all your friends, now we're here and those 6 people can't get you to the next level, you got to do something different. And the second question is, if you are going over the wall tomorrow to start another company, who would you take with you and why? And the answer is not everybody. Because you really have to challenge the people, think more critically about this. It's not about being friends with people, it's making the business sustainable. And by the way, they're not happy anyhow, so I think that's the key, to be self-aware and help the CEO or the founder be self-aware, introspective also.
So we could probably spend the whole hour talking about the challenges of managing a board, and we aren't going to do that. However, why don't you each give me kind of one thing that you think is the most difficult part of managing a board? Cora, I'm going to start with you.
So I think an important thing, the board is most important when the company's at its most challenging situations. So it's sort of like, I always like to say, at a funeral, no one's at their best behavior and everyone's having a bad day. So the same thing goes for a board. The board needs to perform when the company is at its worst. And that's really when the board needs to deliver and help the company get to another level. So you need to make sure that you're set up properly for that, that everyone around the room is good for that, and you need to recognize when it needs to change. So we implied a little bit, how I changed my board quite a bit recently. Part of what I saw going on was that I would be doing a board call, and meanwhile I was getting texts from other board members about, making jokes about what another board member had just said, which really made it impossible for me to present what I was talking about, but also just was a great indicator that things were not right. And then the other situation I had was that most of the time, most of the time during the board meetings, I was fielding questions from people who were actually not investing in the future of the business. And the people who were investing in the future of the business were unhappy with the nature of the conversations. So that was a clear sign, okay, I needed to change something. I needed to get people out of the room. And I had to get approvals from all the people who were entitled to seats in the room to kind of back off of that, and needed to make sure that they recognized that their investment was in good hands with the people who were dealing with it. But that's, I think the thing to keep in mind is that when you're growing the board because people say, hey, I'd like to contribute, it's very easy to say, sure, come on in. We're always welcome, always open to having new opinions around the table, but there is also a time when you're, say, as you mentioned, like, it's hard to take them out. Yeah. And so you need to be making sure that the board will function when it's in its most challenging situations.
Thank you. Libby?
Well, I agree, taking out underperforming or overperforming in a poor way board member is the hardest thing, but I won't go into that since Cora already did. I think the other really difficult thing is in managing a board is to ensure that they're always thinking about succession. A board's responsibility is succession of the CEO, and I am incredibly amazed because I do search work at the C level, and how many companies and boards don't plan for succession.
Sal?
I agree with the succession, which I would put under the umbrella of risk management. I don't hear a lot of risk management discussions in boardrooms, and that's what could be the material negative or positive impact on your business. You can kill yourself by being too successful and outrunning your headlights and money just as easily as being dumb and making bad decisions. And to Cora's point, when you walk in the boardroom and you see the deer in the headlights from the leadership team because there's a big problem, it's be a calming effect. Right? It might be arterial bleeding, which that's a problem. 9 times out of 10, it's not arterial bleeding. They just haven't experienced it before. So I think being that calming effect can really be a help. We can get through this together.
All right, let's shift gears, lightning round. So let's maybe try to do a tight answer. I'm going to pop a bunch of questions at you, but I'm going to start with a couple of individual ones. Cora, ideal size of a board, and what should they be paid, cash, equity, or a mix?
I would say 3 to 5 people is a good size. Cash or equity, I think equity for sure. Equity has to be a part of it. Cash only if the company is really making a lot of money.
Okay. Sal, who can help somebody construct a board?
A lot of different people. First of all, you've got other CEOs or business owners that you work with. Maybe you're in a business owner CEO networking group. That's always a good way to do it. Your legal counsel, always good. There's this organization in town called Private Directors Association. That can help you too. There's some education. There's a way you can post board opportunities and things like that. Was that a shameless plug?
No, that was perfect. That was perfect. You earned your commission today on that one, yeah. All right, Libby, how about, this topic comes up every now and again, how about board term limits? What do you think?
I'm passionate about this. Yes, 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 yes. Board term limits, I think, are very important. This is just my point of view. I think they're very important. They give you an on-ramp and an off-ramp. And the off-ramp, as we talked about, is difficult. And if you have a time frame where you have an off-ramp, it's a much more graceful exit of an underperforming board member. So I highly recommend it. I also think that term limits give people clarity that they have a point in time to contribute to the business. And boards get stale. And if you have term limits and you stagger them appropriately, your board should not get stale.
Okay. One thing from each of you that you think a high-functioning board does better or well as compared to boards that aren't performing as efficiently. Libby, you're nodding your head.
I think high-performing boards are capable of disagreeing and then coalescing.
Cora?
They understand the critical issues facing the company and the strategic objectives.
I think helping the CEO and the leadership team look around the corner so they can work on the business instead of always just being in the business.
I like that one. Excuse me? I like that one too. You got a couple of yeses over here saying that. All right.
I heard it, amen.
Amen. All right, flipping that around, what's the most common mistake you see at the board level? Libby?
People not taking it seriously enough and not being prepared.
I agree with that one too.
Yeah, I would just build on there. Just if the board doesn't recognize when they need to peel the onion a little bit back and understand a little bit more from the layers below the CEO.
The common phrase I use is having somebody keep saying, back in my day, which might have been 30 years ago. It's not relevant and shouldn't be. And the other is people talking about doing war stories. I had to have a conversation with one board member. Stop telling us the war stories. You say the same ones every meeting.
That's funny. All right, so a lot of people here are wanting to get on a board. What's the one bit of advice you would share with them on what they might do to get on that first board? Sal?
Well, I think you first got to answer the questions, why do you want to be a board member? Because it's not just to get something on your resume, it's not just to make the money. Where do you think you can contribute? Know your lane and where you play in that one. And then put together a resume and start networking with people. I told Rick this. I got on my first board because right back there where that camera is, I was here at one of his events about 8 years ago, and I saw a client I had from 20 years ago. I hadn't seen him. The only time he ever came to a Club E event, we met. We were going on long bike rides together, and he said, I got this friend. He's talking about having a board. He's got this transportation company, and over 3 or 4 bike rides, we closed the deal. So you got to take advantage of the opportunities and let people know what you want to do, and you never know where it's going to come from.
Cora?
I have a lot of people in my network who are ex-Dow executives, because I was at Dow Chemical, and a lot of them, when they retire, they say, I want to be on a board. And I think that really you need to have some exposure to a lot of different types of businesses and a lot of different corporations before you're really ready. So I think it definitely takes networking and connections, but definitely you need a broad experience base.
Great. Libby?
I would say understand what value you bring to a board and be able to articulate that. Your board elevator speech needs to be really, really tight, number one. And number two, start now. There is another trend in board search that if you are retired, it may be too late. A lot of boards are looking for people who are still active. The pace of change in the business world is really accelerating, so start now.
Libby, let's stay with you. What's the one thing that you would like our audience to take with them regarding today's session?
I think I would like you all to take away the fact that board service is serious and that people are putting a lot of trust in your hands. And, unfortunately, we have seen people who don't take it seriously enough, who don't prepare. So I would say take it seriously. And you know what? It's not for everybody. And if it's not for you, it's not a judgment on your worth or your character. Do you want to do this work? Because it is work.
Cora?
I think just knowing the difference between a fiduciary and an advisory board is really important, and understanding more to Libby's point here about understanding that it's serious. If it's fiduciary, that you really are opening yourself up to legal risk, and you need to be prepared for that and do the diligence that you need to do in order to take on the fiduciary responsibilities of a company.
Sal?
I agree, especially with what Libby said. It's a job. It's something that you need to invest in, you need to prepare for before you get on the board, and you continue to keep working on it. It's like continuing education. You need to keep investing. Go to PDA events, NACD, whatever it is that you're involved in. You need to keep working on your skill set.
All right. I almost landed the plane at 1 o'clock, 1:02. I saw a couple people get up. It's 1:02. Remember to bring your parking ticket voucher with the sticker. Remember that the Private Directors Association's holiday social and networking event is Wednesday, December 4th, and Thursday, December 5th is my next Club E meeting. We're talking about AI. Let's give a round of applause to our panelists.